One of my professors, when I was in my graduate program, talked about when you're writing a story that at the end of it, there's the inevitable surprise, meaning that you don't see the ending coming necessarily, but when you look back, you see how you got there.
Welcome to Redefine You. I'm Dan Baum. Join us as we continue to explore what happens when we're challenged to change our thoughts, beliefs, or even who we think we are. Episode 40. Wow, 4 full seasons of Redefine You, going back to fall 2019. Of course, this spring and most of 2020 was marked by COVID. We changed our format and focus as we wrestled with all that was happening in the world. And now, hopefully, we're starting to come out of the pandemic. We're certainly seeing signs of hope. It's a little like watching the cicadas come out of the ground into the sunshine. I can't help but feel a little like that, emerging from the darkness. As we reflect on this season, I'm excited to be joined by our writer, Amy Willard. Welcome, Amy.
Hi, Dan.
Well, I'm excited and sad at the same time because you're leaving AACC.
I know.
Well, before we get into that and how you're redefining yourself, because we will, I want to get your thoughts on this season. Our focus, of course, has been on the future of education, especially higher ed. What are your impressions when you think back on the season?
Well, I think a couple of things. First, I think that every season we've done has surprised me as far as I feel like there's something in every episode, even when going into it, I think that there won't be. There's always something that resonates, and that's been a surprise, I think, all 40 times. I think for the future of education, I heard this a lot, and I'm hoping it will be true that things will be more flexible going forward, because I think that was one thing that we learned is possible. Mm-hmm. And I think it helps a lot of people. You know, there's this really rigid picture of what education should look like, you know, classroom and chairs and a teacher standing in front.
Right.
But that setup's not always the best for people, and or even some subjects. So I think, you know, going forward, if we could be more flexible, I think that would be helpful for everyone.
Yeah. It's funny you said surprise. I actually wrote down surprise, but in a little bit of different context, that other people's surprises, like Jamira's surprise going from 4-year to 2-year and how she was delighted by that, and the musical solutions and shifting everything to online courses, people launching businesses, and the bravery that comes with that, and the incredible creativity and innovation that's occurring in education. All those things really jumped out. I definitely heard a lot about connection. And that's just something we've just been hearing all through COVID, is how do we maintain some sense of connection?
Yeah, I think that for me is true for almost all of our seasons, and that it's really come through loud and clear that none of us does anything alone. You know, there's always helpers, and we need those relationships. We need to nurture those relationships and build them. And that's just important to us as human beings.
No, it's a great point. I feel blessed to have you and the rest of the team. No way I could do any of this alone. I've even tried. During COVID, we focused less on story and more on the subject matter experts and their insights. As a writer, what was that like for you?
Well, I think it does make it a little bit harder. I don't know if that's so much as from the writer standpoint or just from my own, and that I really respond to stories and to narrative. And so it takes a little bit more work to get into it, to be able to write about something that isn't a narrative, you know. Mm-hmm. So that part I think was a little trickier.
What's it been like working on the podcast? What's resonated most?
Oh gosh. I think for me, because a lot of what I do in my regular job is sort of, my husband refers to it as writing adjacent. And I think that's true. You know, I do some writing, but it's a lot of editing and a lot of sort of administrative functions. That I think that this, though, is true writing. And it was just a big reminder of how much I love that and how much I need that it just sort of feeds my soul.
Well, episode 40 is kind of a nice round number. What does that mean to you?
So I was thinking about that, and I think, so personally, in my 40s have been great. Life always has its ups and downs, but it was in my 40s that I could finally say, okay, this is who I am. And now where do I want to go? Who do I want to be? And I think for the podcast, maybe that's similar. Our team has this process down now. We kind of know what we're doing. So now where do we want to go?
Well, that's a great transition. I'm going to now ask you about your future. So how are you redefining yourself at this time?
So, after, I think it really was months of talking about this, and deliberating and just talking through things with my husband, that I've decided to leave AACC and pursue a couple of passion projects. So I'll be writing. I've always said that I wanted to write a book, and I'm not getting any younger, so I'm going to attempt that. Gardening, I'm thinking about, I'm looking into the Master Gardeners program.
Nice.
And then also helping my sons transition to their adult life, really. My older son has some special needs, and we're trying to figure out what it is he wants to do and then what he needs to get there. So I'm hoping to be able to be more there for him. Getting to this place, one of my professors, when I was in my graduate program, talked about when you're writing a story, that at the end of it, there's the inevitable surprise, and meaning that you don't see the ending coming necessarily, but when you look back, you see how you got there, and that's definitely the case with this decision. The podcast really fed into this. You can't write for 4 seasons about following your passion and your dreams without that making an impact. And last May, there was an article in the Paris Review, and it was called F the bread is over. There's a lot of layers to that article, but the point that really kind of went home to me was that we have these somewhat arbitrary tasks that we look at, or things that we sort of designate as the signs of success. But what really is important to us? And I think that a lot of people were thinking about that during the pandemic, and that definitely was something on my mind.
Yeah, clearly we heard that a lot on the people we spoke to. So tell me a little more about your background as a writer.
Oh, gosh. So I come from a family of storytellers, and I guess I just always loved words, even as a little kid. My grandmother taught me how to read when I was pretty little, and she did it in self-defense because I just made her crazy asking her to read to me all the time. And I started, writing my own books when I was a little kid. I mean, they were mostly pictures, but I have always thought of myself as a writer, I guess. And I did a lot of painting and drawing. And so there was a time where I was trying to decide which way to go. My husband, who's a scientist, really laughs at this because I decided to, when I went to college, major in English because I thought that was the more practical of the two. Yeah. So I guess it's just been my identity my whole life, really.
And you have an MFA. What led to that?
It's an MA. Actually, that was another thing where it just sort of was somewhat serendipitous. When my kids were little, when I was first divorced, I was underemployed for a long time and had a hard time finding a job. And so at some point during that process, I decided that I needed to make myself more marketable and that maybe having a graduate degree would help. And in order to get a graduate degree, I decided, well, I needed to look for a job at a college so that I could get money to get my master's degree.
Very practical of you.
Yeah, so it came out of a very practical decision. And so then when I started looking at colleges and programs and then, what matched up, I ended up at Hopkins. And then I did their Masters of Arts in writing, specifically the creative nonfiction. So, that was this very practical, somewhat serendipitous thing that led me to that program. And then it was really a defining moment in my life because I think, even though I'd always had this component of, storytelling and wanting to be a writer, I don't think it was until I was in that program that I really was like, I felt comfortable calling myself a writer, out loud to other people. And it just gave me a lot of confidence in my own writing as well. When I realized I could turn something in and, maybe it wasn't perfect, but, nobody said that it sucked. So that was always, it's amazing what that can do for your confidence.
One of your other passion projects is gardening.
Mm-hmm.
And my tea bag has a little quote on it, and I'm going to read it to you now. Talking to plants is one way of talking directly to spirit.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that.
Does that resonate with you?
It does. So, when I set about doing my own core values, one of them, I could never quite come up with a term that I liked for it. And I just sort of refer to it as tree huggery, but that's because it is, yes, that I like being in nature and I love gardening, but there's also a spiritual component to it that I guess it's like meditating for some people, or, it just is sort of what brings me peace. And yeah, I guess it's just soul food to me. It's I'm not just growing vegetables. I'm also, feeding my soul.
Well, and writing must be too.
Yeah. Oh, it is. Yes.
Well, this is not the first time you've redefined yourself. You've kind of alluded to a little bit in different ways. So how would you say you've redefined yourself in the past, or, whether one particular time or multiple times?
Well, I'm of the belief that I think we're always redefining. So, I think that I've redefined myself many, many, many times. I think, 30 years ago, I redefined myself when my mom died, and I was still very young. You redefine yourself when you get married, and redefine myself becoming a mom, and when I got divorced. And then when I decided to get my master's degree, that was a redefining moment, what we just talked about. I think aside from the master's degree, probably the most premeditated redefine I did was when I approached the age that my mom was when she died. I kind of had this sort of, I don't know what to call it. It was more than a moment, but it was, I really struggled. I realized I had all this anxiety, and I started doing all these tasks that I realized what later was part of preparing to go. I kind of had this idea in my head, not consciously, but subconsciously, that I thought that life ended at 43, because she was 43. Mm-hmm. And I had trouble planning or imagining past that. And it was a hard time, but it was also really weird, like realizing that was what was up. And so, I went to therapy. That was one way to get past that. And then, when I did and I started planning things, it was really kind of amazing. It was like the whole world opened up.
Yeah, I can relate. I remember my sisters saying that when they reached the age, they're older than I am, when they reached the age that my mother was when she first got ill, it kind of struck them in kind of a hard way. And I see that with how I look at my father too, and my being a parent, and then what he was dealing with. And it just kind of hits you at a certain point.
Yeah. It's weird now because my kids are approaching the age I was, and they're already older than my siblings were. So that's also a whole nother thing to see, to see what that would be like through their eyes. It's just a different aspect of that.
Well, and you mentioned that your oldest has some special needs. He's in college. So tell me a little more about that, what that experience has been like.
He struggled a little bit. I think that for a couple of reasons. One, I think that he trying to do this transition, which would be a big, huge transition regardless, but in the middle of a pandemic has been hard. He definitely has some special needs, but he doesn't have like as many as some people, but yet he needs more help than your average 18-year-old. So he kind of falls into this no man's land a little bit, where there are, he gets accommodations in his classes, but it's a lot different than high school. In high school, they really, I think, kind of held his hand along the way. And that's not quite, that's not the way it is in college, really. And so it's been interesting and difficult to kind of help him navigate that because, we talked about helicopter parents at one point during the season, and it's sort of like balancing that when you have a kid who has more, who needs you more. It's like, okay, how much do I help and how much do I need to sort of push him to do his own, because there's sort of a fine line of sort of overwhelming him or, this is also happening at a time where he's becoming very much aware of his differences. I think in the past, he was a little bit more oblivious to that. He is, well, you've met him. He's like the happiest go lucky kind of guy. He's super, super chill and happy all the time. And so that's been hard too, as a parent, to see that, he gets upset with himself and he knows that he's different and has become to be concerned about that. And yeah, there's just a lot of tricky things to figure out how to navigate.
Finding that balance must have been something you've had to do all his life. So when did you first become aware of his needs, and how did you become aware? How was it described to you, and what was the realization for you?
Oh, let's see. So he has autism. And when he was 18 months old, he wasn't really speaking. And like a lot of kids who are on the spectrum, he made a lot of his early milestones in the range that they say that kids are supposed to make their milestones, usually towards the end of the range, but still within that range until we got to, about that age. And at 18 months, he really was not talking. He had maybe a handful of words. I don't even know if that was a handful, just a couple. And, so then we started going through the process of having him tested. Our county has an amazing program for the little guys, the infants and toddlers program. Just wonderful, wonderful people working in that program. And they test them, and they, I think he actually also met with a developmental pediatrician. And, they came back that it was autism. And at the time, I knew nothing about autism, nothing at all, other than what you see on Rain Man and the movies, which are certainly not an accurate representation of what that's like, or show you the broad spectrum of how people are on the spectrum. They're just as different as the rest of us are, as far as from one another. And so there was a lot of research. I've always been a big, knowledge is power. So just sort of crash course of as much as I could learn. And, and even that's tricky to navigate because you have, the super medical stuff, and then you have other things where you kind of, maybe it's more accessible, but it's, is it as accurate? Who is writing this?
Right.
I understand this better, but is this really a valid source? Yeah, that was a big process. I should also say during the time too, I was also very pregnant when we got this diagnosis. So I'm sure that did not help.
How did it change your perspective or expectations as a parent?
Oh gosh. Well, in the beginning, there's so many worries when you learn that your child is going to be different. How are people going to treat him? Is he going to have the same, sort of experiences that other children do and all these things. And I think as time goes on, and this really resonated with me with our very first episode when Robin was talking about, being a mom, and it really resonated with me that you just sort of put one foot in front of the other and you do what needs to be done that day.
Mm-hmm.
And, and after a while, we started coming up with strategies and different things. Gabe would, when he was really little, he would get overwhelmed. Like when I have a huge family, so we'd have these family functions, and you take an autistic child into the middle of all these loud people, and he would have a meltdown, which I can't blame him. Sometimes I do.
But, you were doing that on the inside.
So, so we, you start to come up with strategies. Okay, we'll come in. Most of our family functions in those days were at my grandparents'. So we'll come in the side door, we'll go to the back room, and we'll sort of ease into it. And then, after a while, he'd be running around in the middle of things. But you just start doing these little strategies like that. And then after a while, you do them without even realizing that you're doing them. And and I think that is still the case today. We don't have to go to the side door anywhere. I mean, our joke is that my son Matthew and I are both super, super introverted and very shy, and Gabe is not. So our sort of family joke is that Gabe has all the social skills. But so we don't have to do those things now, but there was a long time that we did, and after a while it's just sort of becomes part of your life. You don't know that it's any different.
Well, when I think about how you just handle everything, you often say, "Oh, bother," like from Winnie the Pooh. And I just think that exemplifies how you handle everything with such grace.
I don't feel like it's graceful on the inside. I promise you.
Well, it certainly looks that way from the outside. When you look back, I'm kind of shifting now as we just sort of think about this time that we're in, because I've asked a lot of people about their takeaways and such. And so I'm curious, when you look back many years from now, maybe it's, Grandma, you were alive then. What was it like? How do you want to remember this time?
I'm hopeful that this time, which, has been dark for so many people, I'm so aware of how incredibly lucky I've been and my family has been during this time. And I hope that maybe this is the sort of the dark time that comes before the new beginnings, before new and good things can start again. And I definitely think that's how it's going to be for myself. And I'm hopeful that maybe it'll be that way in a broader sense as well.
Yeah. Speaking of yourself, when I first learned of this, when you shared this with me, and I said I was sad but excited for you, I was also jealous because writing's near and dear to my heart too. So I was like, oh that sounds great. How about when you think about and look back on your experiences at AACC, how do you want to remember that time?
Oh gosh, I think I don't even know that it's a matter of wanting to remember. I think that the way I'll remember it is the people, our team. That's been an amazing experience. There's certainly been a lot of work that we've done over the years, but it's just been a pleasure to work with our team. I think I've been working for a long time, and you always are in an office, and maybe there's one person that you get along with because it's your job to get along with, but maybe you don't like them so much, or maybe they're hard to work with, and that we don't have a single person that way on our team. I think that everybody is wonderful and so talented. It's just been a pleasure to be surrounded by so many creative, talented people.
Well said. I couldn't agree with you more. What advice do you have for us for the podcast going forward?
Oh, let's see. I'm not sure that I have any advice that we haven't talked about as a group. I think that we'd like to get back to stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that often, we talk about different kinds of guests, but the trick is trying to find people who, want to partake and want to have the time to be on the podcast.
It was nice that this time we did get some student stories.
Yeah.
And time is a big issue, whether it's the students or faculty, staff, subject matter experts. That's always an issue. Well, I can't say thank you enough for all that you've done for the podcast, for AACC. And I'm hoping that you're not really done yet. You might help us out a little bit on the podcast going forward. I hope that's a possibility.
I would love that. And thank you, Dan. Thank you for your leadership and for just being great in general.
Well, I so enjoy working with you, Amy, and I look forward to being able to do some more in the future.
Me too. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. It's been a wonderful 4 seasons, but we're going to take a break this summer. We will resume in the fall when AACC celebrates its 60th anniversary. So please stay tuned, listen to past episodes, write us a review, show us some love. Thanks, and be well. Redefine You is a production of Arundel Community College. Our executive producer is Allison Baumbush, our producer is Jeremiah Pravat, and our writer, Amy Carr Willard. Others who help with this podcast include Amanda Behrens, Angie Hamlet, Ben Pierce, and Alicia Renahan. Special thanks to writer extraordinaire Amy Willard. Find show notes, how to subscribe, and other extras on our website, aacc.edu/podcast. I'm your host and creator of this podcast, Dan Baum. Thanks for listening.